The briefing room fell silent when Lieutenant Commander Kayla, Nightshade Voss, walked in. Not the respectful silence reserved for decorated officers, but the awkward quiet that follows whispered jokes about a woman who'd never seen real combat. The SEALs exchanged glances, their eyes lingering on her slight frame, the way she carried herself with measured precision rather than swagger. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hendricks leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "So this is our ace in the hole," he muttered to his teammate, loud enough for half the room to hear. Voss said nothing. She'd heard variations of this conversation in every assignment for the past 8 years. Instead, she moved to the mission board, her fingers tracing the reconnaissance photos of the target compound nestled in the Afghan mountains. The intelligence was thin: a high-value target, possible weapons cache, minimal civilian presence. Standard search and destroy. What wasn't standard was the request for close air support from someone with her particular skill set. "Ma'am," Hendricks continued, his tone dripping with barely concealed condescension, "no disrespect, but we usually work with pilots who have actually been in the sandbox before. This isn't flight school." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Voss turned slowly, her gray eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him shift in his seat. But still, she remained silent. Colonel James Crawford, the mission commander, cleared his throat and stepped forward. He was old-school military, weathered by 3 decades of combat operations, and something in his expression suggested he knew more than he was letting on. "Gentlemen," Crawford's voice cut through the tension like a blade, "Lieutenant Commander Voss comes highly recommended. Her precision strike record is—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "unprecedented." The briefing continued with tactical details, extraction points, and contingency plans. But the SEALs' attention kept drifting to the woman who stood apart from them, studying satellite imagery with an almost obsessive focus. She traced flight patterns with her finger, calculating approach vectors and egress routes with mathematical precision. There was something unsettling about her intensity, the way she seemed to see angles and possibilities that others missed. As the teams prepared to deploy, Sergeant First Class Danny Rodriguez approached Voss near the aircraft hangar. Unlike his teammates, curiosity had overridden his skepticism. "That call sign of yours," he said, "Nightshade, how'd you earn it?" For the first time since entering the briefing room, Voss smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You'll find out soon enough," she replied, her voice carrying a weight that made Rodriguez's skin crawl. Something about her tone suggested that when the shooting started, they were all about to discover why she'd been chosen for this mission. The mission that would change everything they thought they knew about warfare, about legends, and about the woman they dismissed as too soft for their brotherhood of warriors. But first, they had to survive what was coming. Dawn was breaking over the Hindu Kush Mountains as the CH-47 Chinook helicopter carrying the SEAL team approached the landing zone. The twin rotors churned through the thin mountain air, their rhythmic beating the only sound in the pre-dawn darkness. Through the aircraft's small windows, the team could see the stark landscape below, jagged peaks casting long shadows across valleys that had hidden warriors and secrets for millennia. Voss sat in the cockpit of her FA-18 Super Hornet, call sign Nightshade 1, circling at 25,000 feet above the operation. Her aircraft was a masterpiece of engineering, twin engines providing 44,000 pounds of thrust, capable of speeds exceeding Mach 1.8. The Hornet's sleek profile cut through the morning sky like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, monitoring multiple displays that showed everything from fuel consumption to targeting data. "Nightshade 1, this is Overwatch," Crawford's voice crackled through her headset from the command center. "SEAL team is 2 minutes from insertion. Weather is holding, visibility good." "Copy Overwatch. Nightshade 1 maintaining orbit, all systems green." Her response was crisp, professional. Below, she could track the Chinook's progress through her targeting pod, the helicopter appearing as a small thermal signature against the cold mountain terrain. In the troop compartment of the Chinook, the SEALs performed their final equipment checks. Hendricks adjusted his night vision goggles and checked his M4 carbine for the third time. The weapon was equipped with advanced optics and a suppressor, standard gear for close-quarters combat. Rodriguez ran his fingers along the extra ammunition magazines on his vest, each loaded with 30 rounds of 5.56 NATO. The familiar weight of his gear was reassuring. Body armor, radio, medical supplies, everything needed to complete the mission and bring his team home. The helicopter's crew chief held up 2 fingers, then 1, then made a fist. 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds. The Chinook flared as it approached the landing zone, its rear ramp lowering to reveal the alien landscape of Afghanistan at dawn. The SEALs moved with practiced efficiency, their boots hitting rocky ground as they dispersed into defensive positions. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Team Leader," Hendricks whispered into his radio. "Insertion complete, no contact. Beginning approach to target compound." Above them, Voss adjusted her flight path, keeping the strike fighter in a wide circle that would allow her to respond to any threat within seconds. Her radar showed clear skies, but her eyes constantly scanned the horizon. In this business, threats could materialize without warning. She thought about the intelligence briefing, the way Crawford had looked at her when discussing the mission parameters. There was something he hadn't told the SEALs, something about why she specifically had been chosen for this operation. The target compound sat in a valley between 2 ridgelines, accessible only through a narrow pass that the SEALs were now approaching. Intelligence suggested 3 to 5 enemy combatants, possibly armed with small arms and rocket-propelled grenades. Standard threats for a team of this caliber. But Voss had learned long ago that intelligence was often wrong, and missions rarely went according to plan. The SEAL team moved through the mountain terrain like ghosts, their desert camouflage blending with the rocky landscape. Each man was a professional warrior, trained to operate in the world's most dangerous environments. They communicated through hand signals and whispered radio transmissions, a well-choreographed dance of tactical movement that had been perfected through years of combat experience. But something was wrong. As they approached the compound, Rodriguez noticed that the intelligence photos didn't match what he was seeing through his scope. The compound was larger than expected, more complex, with additional structures that hadn't appeared in the satellite imagery. Rodriguez keyed his radio with 2 quick clicks, a signal for the team to halt. Through his rifle scope, he could see movement in the buildings, shadows that suggested far more than the 3 to 5 combatants they'd been briefed about. This wasn't a simple weapons cache. This was something bigger, something that would require more than a standard search and destroy mission. Hendricks crawled forward to Rodriguez's position, his own scope revealing the same troubling details. The compound was fortified, with defensive positions that suggested the occupants had been expecting visitors. Gun emplacements covered the approaches, and the building layouts indicated this was a permanent installation rather than a temporary hideout. "Alpha Team Leader to Overwatch," Hendricks whispered into his radio, his earlier bravado replaced by professional concern. "Situation is not as briefed. Target compound shows significant defensive preparations. Request permission to abort and reassess." Crawford's response was immediate and unexpected. "Negative, Alpha Team Leader. Mission is go. You have Nightshade 1 on station for close air support if needed." In her cockpit 25,000 feet above, Voss heard the exchange and felt her jaw tighten. She'd seen this before, missions where the intelligence was deliberately incomplete, where ground teams were sent into situations without full knowledge of what they were facing. Her targeting pod was already focused on the compound, thermal imaging revealing details that the SEALs couldn't see from their position. "Overwatch, Nightshade 1, she transmitted, her voice carrying a subtle edge. "I'm showing at least 15 thermal signatures in the target compound. This is significantly more than briefed." There was a pause before Crawford responded. Copy, Nightshade 1. Mission parameters unchanged. Voss felt the familiar chill that came with recognition. This wasn't about a weapons cache or a high-value target. This was about something else entirely, something that required her specific skills and experience. She thought about her call sign, about how she'd earned it in skis over Syria 3 years earlier, about the night when everything had changed, when she discovered that some legends were born from necessity rather than choice. The SEALs were about to learn why she'd been chosen for this mission, why Crawford had requested her specifically despite having dozens of other pilots available. But first, they had to survive the next few hours, because what waited for them in that compound was about to test everything they thought they knew about warfare, about courage, and about the woman circling silently above them in the morning sky. The first shot came without warning. Rodriguez was scanning the compound through his rifle scope when the muzzle flash erupted from a hidden position among the rocks. The bullet struck the ground inches from his head, sending fragments of stone against his helmet. Training took over instantly. He rolled left behind a boulder as his teammates scattered to defensive positions. Contact, Hendricks barked into his radio, taking effective fire from multiple positions. The quiet morning exploded into chaos. Automatic weapons fire erupted from the compound and surrounding ridgelines, creating a deadly crossfire that pinned the SEAL team behind minimal cover. The distinctive crack of AK-47 rifles mixed with the deeper thump of PKM machine guns, their heavy bullets chipping away at the rocks that provided the Americans' only protection. Nightshade 1, Alpha Team Leader, Hendricks shouted over the gunfire. We need immediate close air support. Grid coordinates follow. 25,000 feet above, Voss felt the familiar calm descend over her as combat began. Her hands moved across the cockpit controls with practiced efficiency, switching her targeting systems to combat mode. The FA-18's AN/ASQ-228 targeting pod swiveled toward the coordinates Hendricks was transmitting, thermal imaging revealing the enemy positions with crystal clarity. Alpha Team Leader, Nightshade 1 has visual on your position, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the life-and-death situation unfolding below. I count 12 enemy positions in a horseshoe pattern around your location. Recommend you move to the North Ridge for extraction. Negative, Hendricks replied, breathing hard as bullets whined overhead. Too much open ground. We need you to clear a path. This was the moment Voss had been waiting for, though she took no pleasure in it. She could see the tactical situation with perfect clarity from her vantage point. The SEALs were trapped in a kill zone, surrounded by enemy fighters who had prepared this ambush with military precision. The compound wasn't a terrorist hideout. It was a training facility, and the Americans had walked directly into a demonstration of insurgent tactics. Overwatch, Nightshade 1 requesting permission to engage, she transmitted to Crawford. Nightshade 1, you are cleared hot. Danger close authorized. The words sent a chill through the SEAL team. Danger close meant air strikes within 600 meters of friendly forces, close enough that a slight miscalculation could kill them all. Most pilots would refuse such an order, or at best deliver ordnance with extreme caution. But Voss wasn't most pilots. She banked the Super Hornet into a diving attack run, the aircraft's twin engines screaming as she descended from altitude. Her hands worked the targeting system with surgical precision, selecting specific enemy positions while avoiding areas where blast effects might harm the pinned Americans. The FA-18 carried a mixed payload, AGM-65 Maverick missiles for hardened targets, and a 20 M61 Vulcan cannon loaded with 578 rounds of high-explosive ammunition. Alpha Team heads down in 3, 2, 1. The first cannon burst lasted exactly 1.2 seconds, 24 rounds fired with computer-controlled accuracy. The 20 shells struck an enemy machine gun nest with devastating precision, the high-explosive rounds detonating in a sequence that looked like deadly fireworks. The enemy position simply ceased to exist. Voss pulled the Hornet through a climbing turn, already selecting her next target. Her second pass eliminated another machine gun position, the cannon round striking within a 3-foot circle despite the aircraft's speed of 400 knots. She was flying at an altitude that would have made other pilots nervous, low enough that enemy small arms could potentially reach her, but necessary for the precision required. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez whispered, watching through his scope as enemy positions disappeared with mechanical precision. "Who is this woman?" Hendricks was equally stunned. He'd called for close air support hundreds of times during his career, but he'd never seen anything like this. Most pilots delivered ordnance from safe distances, relying on area effects to suppress enemy positions. Voss was surgically removing threats with individual cannon rounds, each burst eliminating specific targets without causing collateral damage that might harm the SEAL team. Her third pass was even more impressive. An enemy sniper had taken position in a rocky outcropping, his location invisible to the ground team, but clearly visible to Voss's thermal imaging. The angle of attack required her to approach from an almost vertical dive, firing cannon rounds into a target area smaller than a car while pulling enough G-forces to make most pilots black out. The enemy position vanished in a cloud of smoke and debris. "Alpha Team Leader, you have a clear path to the North Ridge," Voss transmitted, her voice showing no strain despite having just performed aerial acrobatics that bordered on physics-defying. "Enemy positions along your route have been neutralized." The SEALs moved with renewed confidence, their earlier skepticism about their air support completely evaporated. They bounded from cover to cover, each movement covered by Voss's orbiting aircraft. When a new enemy position opened fire, it was eliminated before the muzzle flash had fully dissipated. But as they reached the extraction point, Rodriguez noticed something that made his blood run cold. The pattern of Voss's attacks, the surgical precision, the way she seemed to anticipate enemy movements, it all seemed familiar. He'd seen combat footage of similar tactics, archived video from a classified operation 3 years earlier that had become legend among special operations personnel. The operation where a single pilot had eliminated an entire terrorist compound without harming a dozen civilian hostages. The pilot whose identity had been classified, whose call sign had become whispered legend. "Nightshade," Rodriguez breathed, the pieces finally clicking into place. "Oh my God, she's the ghost of Damascus." The extraction helicopter was inbound, but Rodriguez barely heard it. He was staring up at the contrail of the FA-18 as it circled protectively overhead, finally understanding why Colonel Crawford had requested this specific pilot for their mission. She wasn't just any naval aviator assigned to provide close air support. She was the woman who had redefined what was possible in the cockpit of a fighter aircraft, whose classified exploits had become the stuff of military legend. The pilot who had single-handedly changed the tactical doctrine for close air support in urban environments. The aviator whose precision and skill had saved more lives than any other pilot in modern warfare. And the SEALs who had questioned her competence were alive because of abilities they were only beginning to understand. The CH-47 Chinook settled into the landing zone with rotors churning up clouds of dust and debris. The SEAL team ran toward the aircraft with practiced efficiency, their mission complete thanks to air support that had exceeded every expectation. As they climbed aboard the helicopter, each man processed what they had witnessed in his own way. Hendricks strapped himself into a seat near the crew chief, his mind replaying the precision strikes that had saved their lives. He'd been in combat for 15 years, had worked with dozens of pilots providing close air support. But what he'd witnessed today was something entirely different. Surgical precision delivered at impossible speeds under conditions that would have challenged the world's best aviators. Rodriguez sat across from him, still stunned by the realization of who had been flying cover for their mission. The ghost of Damascus wasn't just a legend whispered among special operations personnel, she was real. And she just saved their lives with a display of aerial warfare that bordered on artistry. He thought about the classified briefing he'd attended 2 years earlier, where intelligence officers had shown grainy footage of a single aircraft, eliminating 12 terrorist positions, while civilian hostages remained unharmed in the same buildings. The footage had been analyzed by the best tactical minds in the military, and their conclusion had been unanimous. What they were watching was impossible. No pilot possessed the skill to deliver ordnance with such precision while flying at combat speeds under enemy fire. The official report had classified the operation as an anomaly, suggesting that luck and favorable conditions had combined to create an unrepeatable outcome. But Rodriguez had just watched the same pilot repeat the impossible, and he finally understood that luck had nothing to do with it. Nightshade 1, Alpha Team Leader, Hendricks transmitted to Voss as the Chinook lifted off. For the first time since the mission began, his voice carried genuine respect. Outstanding work today. That was the finest close air support I've ever seen. Copy, Alpha Team Leader, came Voss's reply, her tone unchanged despite the life-and-death drama they just survived. Glad I could help. The simplicity of her response only added to the mystery. She had just performed aerial feats that would be studied in military academies for decades, had saved 8 American lives with precision that defied conventional wisdom about what was possible in combat aviation. Yet she spoke about it as casually as discussing the weather. As the helicopter carried them toward the forward operating base, the SEAL team members found themselves glancing up at the sky, where Voss's FA-18 Super Hornet maintained protective overwatch. The aircraft was a speck against the morning clouds, but its presence was reassuring in a way that went beyond normal military protocol. They were under the protection of someone whose abilities transcended ordinary skill and entered the realm of legend. Back at the base, Colonel Crawford waited in the operations center, monitoring radio communications from the mission. He had known exactly what would happen when Voss engaged the enemy positions, had seen her capabilities demonstrated before under different circumstances. The SEAL team's request for this mission had provided him with an opportunity to showcase those abilities to personnel who might need her skills in future operations. But there was more to his decision than tactical considerations. Crawford had been present during the Syrian operation 3 years earlier, had witnessed firsthand the events that had created the Ghost of Damascus legend. He knew that Voss's precision came from training that went far beyond standard naval aviation curriculum, skills developed through experiences that few people could understand or endure. The radio crackled with the Chinook pilot's voice. Overwatch, this is Extraction 1. Package is secure, returning to base. Copy, Extraction 1, Crawford replied. Then switching frequencies. Nightshade 1, mission complete. You're cleared to return to base. Roger, Overwatch. Nightshade 1 returning to base. Crawford allowed himself a small smile. The SEALs who had questioned Voss's readiness for combat would never make that mistake again. More importantly, word would spread through the special operations community about the aviator whose skills exceeded everything they thought possible about close air support. What they didn't know, what Crawford hoped they would never need to know, was why Voss possessed such extraordinary abilities. The classified training program that had created her skills. The price she had paid to become the weapon that had saved their lives today. Some legends were born from heroism and natural talent. Others were forged in shadows, created through methods that challenged the boundaries between soldier and something else entirely. Voss belonged to the latter category, and Crawford prayed that the world would never become desperate enough to require more pilots like her. But if that day came, at least now there were 8 special operations personnel who had witnessed her abilities firsthand, who could testify to what was possible when necessity met training that went beyond conventional limits. The ghost of Damascus was no longer just a legend whispered in classified briefings. She was real, she was operational, and she was everything the stories claimed her to be. The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman buzzed with an energy that Colonel Crawford hadn't felt in years. Word of the morning's mission had spread through the base with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. Personnel who had heard the radio communications were sharing details with those who hadn't, creating a growing legend that centered around the female pilot who had just redefined what close air support meant in modern warfare. The SEAL team sat around a conference table, each man still processing what they had witnessed. Their gear was cleaned and stored, their weapons secured, but their minds remained focused on the impossible precision they had seen delivered from 25,000 feet. Hendricks found himself repeatedly checking his watch, calculating the timing of Voss's strikes, trying to understand how someone could deliver ordnance with such accuracy while flying at speeds that compressed time into microseconds. The first cannon burst, Rodriguez said, breaking the contemplative silence. 24 rounds in 1.2 seconds, and every single one hit within a 3-foot circle, at 400 knots, while pulling G-forces. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, the team's communications specialist, shook his head in amazement. "I've been calling in airstrikes for 12 years. I've worked with A-10 Warthogs, Apache helicopters, B-52 bombers. I've never seen anything like what she did today." "The angle of attack on that third pass," added Sergeant Jake Morrison, the team's explosive ordnance expert. "She came in almost vertical, fired into a target the size of a pickup truck, and didn't put a single round outside the intended impact zone. The physics alone should have made that impossible." Crawford entered the debriefing room carrying a classified folder, his expression revealing nothing about its contents. He had decided that these men deserved to understand what they had witnessed, even if the information came with security restrictions that would follow them for the rest of their careers. "Gentlemen," he began, taking a seat at the head of the table, "what you experience today represents capabilities that are classified at the highest levels. What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room." The SEALs straightened in their chairs, recognizing the tone that preceded revelations that would change their understanding of military operations. Crawford opened the folder and withdrew a series of photographs, satellite images, aircraft specifications, and tactical diagrams that documented events from 3 years earlier. "Damascus, Syria, September 15th, 3 years ago," Crawford began. "A joint CIA Special Operations mission to eliminate a terrorist training facility. Intelligence indicated 12 high-value targets meeting in a compound that also housed 23 civilian hostages, including children." He placed the first photograph on the table, an aerial view of an urban compound surrounded by residential buildings. The mission parameters seemed impossible. Eliminate the targets while ensuring 0 civilian casualties. Traditional strikes were ruled out due to collateral damage concerns. A ground assault would have resulted in hostage deaths. The SEALs leaned forward, studying the images with professional interest. They could see the tactical problem immediately. The target compound was integrated into a civilian area, with innocent people in buildings that would be affected by any conventional strike. The operation was assigned to a single FA-18 Super Hornet, Crawford continued, flown by a pilot whose identity has remained classified. The attack lasted exactly 17 minutes. 12 precision strikes eliminated every terrorist target while leaving the civilian areas completely undamaged. He placed a series of before and after photographs on the table. The images showed specific buildings within the compound, reduced to rubble while adjacent structures remained intact. The precision was surgical, impossible to achieve through conventional weapons delivery. "The pilot's call sign," Crawford said quietly, "was Nightshade." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Rodriguez was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. She's been doing this for 3 years. The Ghost of Damascus wasn't just one mission, it was the beginning. Crawford nodded. The Syrian operation established new protocols for precision strikes in urban environments. Every tactical manual was rewritten based on what happened that night. But the pilot's identity has remained classified because of the methods used to develop her capabilities. What methods? Hendricks asked, though something in Crawford's expression suggested he might not want to hear the answer. That information is classified beyond your clearance level, Crawford replied. What I can tell you is that Lieutenant Commander Voss represents the culmination of training programs that push human performance to its absolute limits. The precision you witness today isn't just skill, it's the result of conditioning that few people could survive. The weight of that statement settled over the room. Each SEAL had endured training that most people would consider impossible, months of physical and mental challenges designed to create warriors capable of operating in the world's most dangerous environments. The suggestion that Voss had undergone something beyond even their experience was sobering. "Why are you telling us this?" Torres asked. Crawford gathered the photographs and returned them to the folder. "Because you've seen her capabilities firsthand. If future operations require her specific skill set, you'll be among the few personnel qualified to work with her. And because you deserve to understand that your initial assessment was incorrect." The implied criticism stung, but none of the SEALs protested. Their dismissive attitude during the briefing now seemed not just wrong, but dangerously naive. They had questioned the competence of someone whose abilities exceeded their understanding of what was possible in military aviation. "She saved our lives today," Rodriguez said simply. "Whatever training created those capabilities, we owe her our lives." Crawford stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Gentlemen, what you witnessed today will likely remain classified for years. The official report will describe routine close air support that assisted in mission completion. But among yourselves, remember what precision looks like when it's delivered by someone operating at the absolute peak of human capability." After he left, the SEAL team sat in contemplative silence. Outside, they could hear the sound of aircraft operations, helicopters arriving and departing, jets warming up for patrol missions, the routine sounds of a military base in a combat zone. Somewhere among those sounds was the FA-18 Super Hornet that had saved their lives, and the pilot whose abilities had redefined their understanding of what was possible in warfare. The Ghost of Damascus was no longer a legend. She was their guardian angel, and they would never forget what that meant. Lieutenant Commander Kayla Voss sat in the cockpit of her FA-18 Super Hornet, engines winding down after the morning's mission. The flight line at FOB Chapman buzzed with routine activity, maintenance crews servicing aircraft, pilots conducting pre-flight inspections, the controlled chaos of military aviation in a combat zone. But Voss remained motionless in her seat, staring through the canopy at the Afghan sky that had become her office. The mission debrief would come later. The paperwork, the official reports that would sanitize what had actually happened into language suitable for commanders who hadn't witnessed the impossible precision delivered from 25,000 feet. She had performed similar debriefs dozens of times, describing tactical maneuvers and weapons employment, while carefully omitting the details that made her capabilities unique. Her crew chief, Technical Sergeant Maria Santos, approached the aircraft with the post-flight inspection checklist. Santos had been working with Voss for 8 months, had seen her return from missions that other pilots described as routine, but somehow felt different. There was something about the way Voss flew, the way she approached combat situations, that set her apart from every other aviator on the base. "How'd she handle today, ma'am?" Santos asked, beginning her inspection of the aircraft's weapon systems. "Like a dream, Santos. She's a beautiful machine." The response was typical Voss, professional, focused on the technical aspects while revealing nothing about the human cost of what she had accomplished. Santos had noticed this pattern before. After particularly challenging missions, most pilots needed to talk through what had happened, processing the stress and adrenaline through conversation with their ground crews. Voss simply shut down, becoming emotionally unavailable in a way that suggested deep psychological conditioning. Maintenance reports look good, Santos continued, checking hydraulic fluid levels and control surface operation. No battle damage, all systems nominal. Whatever you did up there today, you brought her home clean. Voss finally began the shutdown procedures, her hands moving through the checklist with mechanical precision. Switch positions, system confirmations, the gradual transformation of a weapon system into an inert machine. But her mind remained focused on the mission, analyzing her performance with the critical eye of someone whose margin for error was measured in inches rather than yards. The SEAL team's radio communications had revealed their surprise at her precision, their growing realization that they were witnessing capabilities beyond normal military aviation. She had heard similar reactions before, during the Syrian operation and subsequent classified missions. The progression was always the same: initial skepticism, then amazement, then the uncomfortable questions about how such precision was possible. What they didn't understand, what she hoped they would never need to understand, was the price of that precision. The years of conditioning that had reshaped not just her flying skills but her fundamental relationship with fear, stress, and human limitation. The program that had created her abilities had also created something else, a psychological distance from normal human experience that made connections with other people increasingly difficult. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her younger sister Emma, a reminder of the world beyond military bases and combat missions. "Haven't heard from you in weeks. Mom's worried. Call when you can." The message triggered a familiar pang of guilt. Emma was a pediatric nurse in Seattle, engaged to a software engineer, living the kind of normal life that seemed increasingly foreign to Voss. She had missed Emma's birthday, their mother's retirement party, countless family gatherings that conflicted with training schedules and deployment cycles. But more than scheduling conflicts kept her distant from family. How could she explain what her life had become? How could she describe the conditioning that had given her superhuman precision while creating an emotional numbness that made civilian relationships feel artificial? Emma would never understand that her sister had become something beyond normal human experience, a weapons system with a heartbeat. "Ma'am," Santos's voice brought her back to the present. "Aircraft is secured. Is there anything else you need?" "No, Santos, good work today." Voss climbed down from the cockpit, her flight suit showing no evidence of the physical stress she had endured during the mission. G-forces that would have incapacitated most pilots, precision flying that required split-second timing, life-and-death decisions made at supersonic speeds, all processed and filed away with the emotional detachment that had been trained into her. Walking toward the squadron building, she noticed a group of ground personnel watching her with expressions she recognized. Word of the morning's mission was spreading, creating another layer of legend around the pilot who could deliver impossible precision. She had become a curiosity, a demonstration of capabilities that challenged conventional understanding of human limitations. Colonel Crawford was waiting in her squadron office, along with a man she didn't recognize, tall, thin, wearing civilian clothes that didn't quite conceal his military bearing. The stranger's presence immediately triggered her threat assessment protocols, subtle changes in posture and awareness that prepared her for potential danger. "Lieutenant Commander Voss," Crawford said, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Marcus Webb from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. He's been following your career with considerable interest." Webb extended his hand, his eyes studying her with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing an interesting specimen. "Commander Voss, your performance today was quite remarkable, even by your standards." The comment confirmed what she had suspected. This meeting wasn't about mission debriefing or routine personnel matters. DARPA's interest meant that someone in the defense establishment was considering expanding the program that had created her capabilities. The possibility both intrigued and terrified her. "What can I do for you, Dr. Webb?" "We need to talk about the future," he replied, his tone suggesting that the conversation would change everything she thought she understood about her role in the military. The future, as it turned out, would be more complex and dangerous than anything she had experienced in the skis over Syria or Afghanistan. Dr. Marcus Webb settled into the chair across from Voss, his movements precise and economical in a way that suggested military training, despite his civilian appearance. His eyes held the calculating intelligence of someone accustomed to evaluating human performance parameters, measuring capabilities against theoretical limitations. "Commander Voss," he began, "your performance metrics from today's mission have been analyzed by our technical staff. Response time, precision accuracy, G-force tolerance, target acquisition speed, every measurable aspect of your capabilities exceeded baseline human performance by factors that shouldn't be possible." Crawford shifted uncomfortably in his chair, recognizing the direction of Webb's comments. The classified nature of Voss's training program meant that even senior military officers often lacked full understanding of what they were witnessing when she operated at peak capability. "I'm just doing my job, Dr. Webb," Voss replied, her tone neutral despite the clinical nature of his assessment. "Training and experience." Webb smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "Training, yes, but training of a very specific nature, conducted under the auspices of programs that most people believe are theoretical rather than operational." He opened a briefcase and withdrew a tablet computer, its screen displaying performance data from her morning mission. Charts and graphs showed reaction times measured in milliseconds, precision calculations that approached theoretical perfection, physiological responses that defied normal human limitations. "The Syrian operation 3 years ago established your capabilities as unprecedented in military aviation," Webb continued. "Subsequent missions have confirmed that your performance wasn't an anomaly. It was a demonstration of enhancement techniques that have profound implications for future military operations." The word enhancement hung in the air like an accusation. Voss maintained her composure, but internal alarm systems were triggering warnings about the direction of this conversation. DARPA's interest meant that someone wanted to understand the methods that had created her abilities, possibly to replicate them in other personnel. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Dr. Webb." "I'm implying nothing, Commander. I'm stating facts. The human nervous system has specific limitations regarding reaction time, processing speed, and stress tolerance. Your performance today exceeded those limitations by margins that require explanation." Crawford intervened, his protective instincts overriding protocol. "Dr. Webb, Commander Voss is one of our finest pilots. Her training and dedication have produced exceptional results through conventional methods." Webb's smile widened, suggesting he found Crawford's defense amusing. "Colonel, with respect, there's nothing conventional about performance that redefines what we believe possible in human capabilities. The precision strikes we observed today required computational abilities that exceed baseline human neurology." He touched the tablet screen, bringing up a video file from the morning's mission. Thermal imaging showed Voss's aircraft delivering cannon fire with surgical precision, each burst calculated to eliminate specific threats while avoiding collateral damage to areas mere feet away. This footage shows 24 cannon rounds delivered over 1.2 seconds.